In this video, we take a look at the vintage Star Wars figures that debuted on the Empire Strikes Back card backs that are still to make it into the modern vintage collection. Hey there Star Wars collectors, and welcome to episode 2 of the Missing Vintage Collection figures. This is the series where we take a look at the gaps that are still present in the vintage collection, and if you missed episode 1, that's where we looked at the figures that were released back in the day on the Star Wars chase cards, but are still yet to be released in the modern vintage line. So if you missed that video, I will leave a link in the description below so you can watch that video next. But as I mentioned, in this video we're going to be looking at the vintage figures that debuted on the Empire Strikes Back cards and that are still yet to be released by Hasbro in the modern vintage collection. So if you like this video, hit that like button, and if you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button so that you don't miss future episodes. Now with all that being said, let's get straight onto the first figure, which is one of my all-time favourite card backs, and that is the AT-AT driver, or AT-AT driver as some of you may call it. So in my opinion, this could be a fairly easy one for Hasbro to put out, as we've had pretty decent versions of this figure in the past. So there's the Saga Collection version, which looks great. I do have that figure loose, but at the end of the day it would need an update because the articulation isn't fully there. He does only have the swivel elbows. Now there's also the Legacy Collection version, which unfortunately I do not have loose. So if any of you guys have him, let me know in the comments below if that particular figure would be good enough to do a straight repack. Of course, the AT-AT driver was released in 2 different special action figure 3-packs as part of the vintage collection. Now again, I do not have these, so I'm not even sure if this is perhaps the figure that was repacked from the Legacy collection, but as I say, if anyone does know that's watching, let me know in the comments below. But I've got to say, I do love these 3-packs, and one day I hope to have them all. I do collect them, so I've got about 3 or 4 of them, but yeah, I really do hope to have them all. I would hope they would use exactly the same card back as the original, as this is an absolute classic. Lovely clear image of the AT-AT driver on that black background really pops, and the choice of yellow name pill and background behind the figure is an absolute genius in my opinion. A truly great figure and card back combo that is a must for the vintage collection. And the next gap that needs filling is for FX7. Now this figure wasn't everyone's favourite back in the day. He didn't really do a lot in the film, let alone when it came to actually playing with the figure. But still, it's still a classic from the vintage line and another card back that just screams Star Wars for me. I think there was a pretty good version of this droid as part of the Power of the Jedi line, which looks decent enough. And also I'm pretty sure he was also in one of the vintage collection 3-packs. I think it's the Hoth Rebels 3-pack. So anything like that on a vintage card would look pretty awesome to me. In fact, I'm just going to throw up an image here. It's actually a custom that's been created by a guy called Wade on Facebook. He does have an Instagram account as well, which I will link to in the description below. But I'm sure you agree, this custom card back that he's done here looks great. And if Hasbro were to produce anything like that in the vintage collection, it would be a must buy, I'm sure. Moving on to the next gap, that is the Ugnaught, and it's another classic missing from the vintage collection. So there are 2 different Ugnaughts released as part of the Legacy collection in 2010, I want to say. Let me know in the comments if I'm wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure it was 2010. I'll throw those up on the screen now so you can see. And in my opinion, if they're not going to make a brand new figure for the Ugnaught, then I would pick the one that is dressed in blue. He would be my preferred choice to repack on the vintage card. So that's the one in the blue and white box just here. I don't know, I just think he looks more accurate to the original figure and possibly more screen accurate too. Still, it's a gap that needs filling, so come on Hasbro, let's see if we can fill these gaps. It seems the perfect opportunity for Hasbro to get most of these figures out next year, with it being the 40th anniversary. The next figure released back in the day that we are still waiting for in the vintage collection is Lobot, another figure that I can't actually believe hasn't been done yet. After all, he plays quite a big role as Lando's right-hand man in The Empire Strikes Back. Now we have had versions of him before, notably the original Trilogy collection version. This is the one where he's holding some kind of datapad or laptop or something in one of his hands and a little tool in the other. To me it looks like he's about to do a presentation or something, which is very odd. Plus the articulation would need improving, as he does only have the swivel joints rather than the ball hinges. So to me this would be a whole new figure but placed on a replica of the vintage card back. Next up we have the 2 Bespin security guards. So neither of these are present in the vintage collection except for the one that was included in the Bespin Alliance 3-pack. And in all honesty, the less said about him the better. Absolutely awful face sculpt and paint job in my opinion. and well due an update. Articulation is obviously pretty good as it was part of the first run of the Vintage Collection in 2010, but as I said, in my opinion we need a whole new figure, or certainly a new head sculpt anyway. Obviously we also do have the other figure as well, the black version, which is another figure and card back missing from the Vintage Collection. Moving swiftly on to the Imperial Commander. Now this figure's a bit of an odd one because the original figure back in the day was actually produced in black, whereas the image of the character on the card back is actually dressed in grey. Now the character, as you may have noticed, is also General Veers, but without all of his Attack Commander gear on. Now we have had an Imperial Commander before. He was part of the second Imperial set, which was a special action figure 3-pack released in 2011. Now as far as the figure goes, it's a pretty good figure, all the usual articulation, albeit swivel thighs, but the face could really do with an update, or the use of the photoreal technology that Hasbro have been using recently, but they have to stick him on the original card back. Next up we have the Hoth Rebel Commander. Another classic figure and card back, and another strange one as there was a bit of a mismatch with this one. So as you can see, the figure, the vintage figure, had a moustache, whereas the guy on the card back didn't. Now I'm sure there's a story behind that, probably something to do with them grabbing images for the card backs before having full access or info of the characters from the film. But there was a Rebel Commander in the film that looks more like the figure. He did have the moustache. So as you know, we did have the Rebel Soldier in Wave 1 last year. So to complete that scene, it would be awesome to get the Commander on that classic vintage card, even if the image doesn't match the figure. On to another fairly big gap, and this one is another droid. It's 21B, which is another medical droid, or more specifically a surgical droid. So he's the guy that fixed Luke Skywalker up after the Wampa attack, and again later in near the end of the film where he had his hand attached, his mechanical hand. Another nice card back, this one, and we have had this figure before. He was actually part of the Rebels 3-pack, so another special action figure set as part of the Vintage Collection back in 2010-2012. So I haven't actually seen this figure close up. I've never had him loose, or I've never even had the 3-pack. So any of you guys out there that have had this figure, let me know in the comments below if it's a good enough figure to repack straight onto that vintage style card. So that's all the figures that we've never actually had before on vintage style cards. Now we're going to be taking a look at a couple of figures that we have actually had before, but could either do with an update or a correction. So the first one is the correction. So this is R2-D2. Now he was actually released as part of the Vintage Original Trilogy collection, and he was released on the correct card back image, but for some reason, some strange reason, they released him with a Return of the Jedi logo. So that just seems pretty odd to me. I have no idea why they did that, but it does need to be fixed. So if they could just release him on the proper Empire Strikes Back card and perhaps even update the figure, that would be awesome. As for the update that I just mentioned, that is going to be of course for Lando Calrissian. So again, another figure released in the Vintage Original Trilogy collection, but this figure's torso had the horrible habit of discolouring. It's actually quite difficult these days to get one that hasn't sort of turned a green colour. So if Hasbro could fix that issue, give the head sculpt a makeover with the photoreal tech, and Bob's your uncle, we've got a nice new Lando on a vintage style card. Well, that's it for this episode of the Missing Vintage Collection figures. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Don't forget to leave a thumbs up if that is the case. Now I look forward to making episode 3, where we're going to be taking a look at the gaps from the vintage Return of the Jedi line. So until then, I hope you all have a great day. Thank you very much for watching as always, and we will see you on the next one.